Oracle Automatic Storage Management, also known as Oracle ASM, was introduced with Oracle 10G, Release 1, in 2003. Oracle ASM is a volume manager and a file system for Oracle database files. Oracle ASM supports single-instance databases, as well as Oracle Real Application Clusters, or RAC, databases. ASM is Oracle's recommended storage management solution that provides an alternative to conventional volume managers, file systems, and raw devices. Oracle Grid Infrastructure software contains two major components: Oracle Clusterware and Oracle ASM. Oracle Clusterware is a portable cluster software that allows clustering of independent servers so that they cooperate as a single system. Oracle Clusterware was first released with Oracle 10G, Release 1, as the required cluster technology for Oracle Real Application Clusters. Oracle ASM is a volume manager and a file system for Oracle database files. Installation of Oracle Grid Infrastructure software will install and configure Oracle Clusterware and Oracle ASM on standalone servers or in Oracle Real Application Clusters. Now, let us understand how Oracle ASM works on a standard cluster. For this discussion, let us assume that we have two nodes in this cluster. Storage is provided by storage server over storage area network. Each node in the cluster will run one ASM instance. ASM instances will manage and administer the ASM disk groups. One or more databases can access ASM disk groups for database file storage. All storage traffic can be isolated from public network traffic using a dedicated storage network. All users and applications can connect to databases using a public network. ASM and clusterware components will communicate between each cluster node using a dedicated private interconnect network. In a standard Real Application Clusters configuration, if ASM instance on one node fails, then databases on the same node will also fail. In other words, every node in the cluster needs to run an ASM instance. This restriction is removed in Oracle 12c using a new feature called Oracle Flex ASM. Now, let us understand how Oracle 12c's new feature, Flex ASM, works. First thing to understand is, Flex Cluster and Flex ASM are two different options. They are not same. For this discussion, let us assume that we have 4 nodes in this cluster. Storage is provided by storage server over storage area network. By default, when Oracle Flex ASM cluster is configured, ASM cardinality is set to 3. That means 3 nodes in this cluster will run ASM instances. Other nodes without ASM instance will connect to a node with ASM instance as an ASM client. ASM instances will manage and administer the ASM disk groups. One or more databases can access ASM disk groups for database file storage. All storage traffic can be isolated from public network traffic using a dedicated storage network. All users and applications can connect to databases using a public network. Clusterware components will communicate between each cluster node using a dedicated private interconnect network. With FlexASM cluster configuration, we have an option to use a dedicated ASM network for communication between ASM instances, or we can use private interconnect network for ASM communications. For this discussion, we are using a dedicated ASM network for ASM instances to communicate. As you can see here, the database on the third server is an ASM client to an ASM instance on fourth server. Now, imagine ASM instance fails on the fourth server. ASM cluster will detect this failure and relocate ASM instance to another node in the cluster. An ASM instance is started on third server. Now, the database on the fourth server will connect to an ASM instance on third server as an ASM client. During such ASM instance failures, only for few seconds, some databases will not be able to communicate with failed ASM instances. But, as soon as ASM instances are recovered, databases will continue to operate without any issues. At any given point of time, configured ASM cardinality is maintained by ASM cluster. Oracle FlexASM cluster provides high availability for databases even when ASM instances fail, because databases can connect to ASM instances on other nodes in the cluster as ASM clients. This was not possible before Oracle 12c Release 1. It is possible to run ASM instances on all cluster nodes in FlexASM cluster using ASM cardinality set to all. Now, let us review operating system groups and users required for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. Install group is the Oracle inventory group. Users in this group are privileged to install and upgrade Oracle binaries. DBA group will get sysdba privilege. Users in this group will get full administration privileges to manage databases. OPA group will get sysopa privilege. Users in this group can start up and shut down database instances. ASM DBA group will get sysdba privilege for ASM. Users in this group will get full administration privileges to manage ASM instances. ASM admin group will get sysasm privilege. Users in this group will get privileges to mount and dismount disk groups and related storage administration privileges. ASM OPA group will get sysopa privilege for ASM. Users in this group can start up and shut down ASM instances. Operating system user grid should be used to install Oracle Grid Infrastructure software. Grid user will own and run Oracle Clusterware and Oracle ASM. Note that some components of Oracle Clusterware will run with root user privileges. install group should be assigned as primary group for grid user. ASM admin, ASM DBA, and DBA groups should be assigned as secondary groups for grid user. Now, let us review folders required for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. We will use this folder for Oracle Inventory. We will use this folder as Grid Infrastructure Base. This folder will store ASM and clusterware related diagnostic logs and administrative logs. We will use this folder as Grid Infrastructure Home. This folder will store all files required for Grid Infrastructure software. After installation of Grid Infrastructure software, this folder will be owned by root user. So, Grid Infrastructure Home folder should not be under Grid Infrastructure Base folder. All these folders should be owned by grid user and install group. Installing Grid Infrastructure software using grid user and RDBMS software using Oracle user will provide strong job role separation, and it is strongly recommended by Oracle. I have logged into Rex1 server as root user. In this session, we will take a look at how to install Oracle 12c Release 1 Grid Infrastructure software and configure Oracle Flex ASM on a 4-node cluster. As you can see here, I am running Oracle Linux Server Release 6.4. This is my Linux kernel version, and notice that this is a 64-bit server. Also notice that this is an unbreakable enterprise kernel. Now, let us perform basic system readiness check for Grid Infrastructure software installation. On our Oracle cluster, we will use Cluster Time Synchronization Service (CTSS) instead of Network Time Protocol (NTP). So, we will disable NTP on our servers. This command is used to stop NTP daemon on this server. This command is used to disable NTP service on this server. This command output shows that NTP service is disabled for all run levels on this server. Using this command, we have renamed configuration file for NTP daemon service to avoid any accidental startup of NTP service. We have to disable NTP service on all nodes of our cluster. Now, let us review our etc hosts file. These are the public IP addresses of our servers. All users and applications will connect to databases using these public network IPs. These are the private IP addresses of our servers. Clusterware components will communicate between each cluster node using these dedicated private interconnect network IPs. These are the ASM IP addresses of our servers. This dedicated ASM network will be used for communication between ASM instances. These are the virtual IP addresses of our servers. These virtual IPs are required for Oracle Real Application Clusters setup. These IPs will not respond before installing grid infrastructure software. Single Client Access Name (SCAN) is a feature used in Oracle RAC, provides a single name for clients to access any Oracle database running in a cluster. These IPs are configured in such a way that one single name resolves to 3 IP addresses using a round-robin algorithm. These are the SCAN IP addresses for our cluster. These are the public and private IP addresses for our storage server. Now, let us review our resolve.conf file. Mainly, we need 2 entries in this file: search domain name and domain name server IP address. Now, let us review our operating system groups, which are required for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. O install group is the Oracle Inventory group. DBA group will get sysdba privilege. OPA group will get sysopa privilege. ASM DBA group will get sysdba privilege for ASM. ASM admin group will get sysasm privilege. ASM OPA group will get sysopa privilege for ASM. As you can see here, operating system user grid exists, and O install group is assigned as primary group for grid user. DBA, ASM admin, and ASM DBA groups are assigned as secondary groups for grid user. Now, let us review folders required for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. We will use this folder for Oracle Inventory. We will use this folder as Grid Infrastructure Base. This folder will store ASM and clusterware related diagnostic logs and administrative logs. We will use this folder as Grid Infrastructure Home. This folder will store all files required for Grid Infrastructure software. After installation of Grid Infrastructure software, this folder will be owned by root user. So, Grid Infrastructure Home folder should not be under Grid Infrastructure Base folder. All these folders are owned by Grid user and O install group. On this server, we have completed basic system readiness check for Grid Infrastructure software installation. We have disabled network time protocol. We have reviewed etc hosts file. We have reviewed etc resolve.conf file. We have reviewed operating system groups and users required for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. We have reviewed the folders required for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. We have to complete all these steps on the other nodes in our cluster. Now, let us check ASM disks on this server. As you can see here, we have 10 ASM disks on this REX1 server. As you can see here, we have the same 10 ASM disks on this REX2 server. As you can see here, we have the same 10 ASM disks on this REX3 server. As you can see here, we have the same 10 ASM disks on this REX4 server. Now, we have shared storage ASM disks attached to all of our cluster nodes, and our cluster nodes are ready for Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation. I have logged into REX1 server as Grid user. I have already downloaded and extracted Oracle 12c Release 1 Grid Infrastructure software. Now, I will run installer to start installation of Oracle 12c Release 1 Grid Infrastructure software. This screen provides options for software updates. We have 3 options on this screen. We can provide My Oracle Support credentials, and installer will download software updates for this installation. Another option is to download updates manually before starting the installation, and provide the update file's location here to the installer. I have selected an option to skip software updates for this installation. This screen provides options for installation. We have 4 options on this screen. Install and configure Oracle Grid infrastructure for a standalone server. Upgrade Oracle Grid infrastructure or Oracle ASM. Install Oracle Grid infrastructure software without configuring it. I have selected an option to install and configure Oracle Grid infrastructure for a cluster. This screen provides options for cluster type. We have 2 options on this screen. Configure a flex cluster. Flex cluster is a new feature introduced with Oracle 12c Release 1. I have selected to configure a standard cluster. This screen provides options for installation type. We have 2 options on this screen. Typical installation with basic configuration. I have selected to perform advanced installation, which allows us to customize various options according to our environment. This is the product language selection screen. By default, English language is selected. This is the Grid plug-and-play options screen. Here, I have provided a name for my cluster. This is the scan name for my cluster. This is the scan port. Users and applications can use the scan name and scan port to connect to any database on this cluster. I will not configure grid naming service for this cluster. This is the cluster node information screen. I will add all my cluster nodes to this list by providing public host names and virtual host names. Now, we will establish passwordless login between servers using SSH connectivity option. I will provide grid user password and installer will configure passwordless login between servers. Installer has successfully established passwordless secure shell connectivity between cluster nodes for grid user. This is the Network Interface Selection screen. This network interface and subnet will be used for public network. This network interface and subnet will be used for private interconnect. This network interface and subnet will be used for ASM network for communication between ASM instances. This is a new option when configuring Oracle Flex ASM cluster. This is the Grid Infrastructure Management Repository selection screen. Grid Infrastructure Management Repository is a special type of database that can be used to manage operations of Oracle Grid Infrastructure. We can either configure or choose not to configure Grid Infrastructure Management Repository. I have selected to configure Grid Infrastructure Management Repository. This is the Storage Options screen. We have 3 options on this screen. Use Standard ASM for storage. This option will configure ASM instances on all nodes of the cluster. Use Oracle Flex ASM for storage. This is a new feature introduced with Oracle 12c Release 1. ASM instances will be configured on reduced number of cluster nodes. By default, ASM cardinality is set to 3 ASM instances. Use Shared File System. This is for using clustered file systems for storage instead of ASM. I have selected an option to use Oracle Flex ASM for storage. This option will configure an Oracle Flex ASM cluster. This is the Create ASM Disk Group screen. ASM Disk Group data will be created. I have selected external redundancy for this disk group. Default allocation unit size is 1 MB. These are the ASM disks labeled by Oracle ASM Lib. Installer has detected them and it has listed them here as candidate disks for ASM use. I have selected 2 disks to be added to this data disk group. Initially, this disk group will store Oracle cluster registry and voting disk files. This disk group will also store ASM instance server parameter file and ASM instance password file. If Grid Infrastructure Management Repository was selected earlier, then database-related files for Grid Infrastructure Management Repository are also stored in this disk group. This is the ASM password setup screen. We can specify password for 2 admin users for ASM instance. First user is sysuser with sysASM privileges, which will be used for administration of ASM instance. Second user is ASM SNMP user with sysDBA privileges to monitor the ASM instance. This is the ASM Simple Network Management Protocol user. even though it is not suggested to use same password for these two users. For this installation, I have selected to use same password for these two user accounts. I have got a warning message because the password I have provided is not strong enough. I will ignore this warning message and continue. This is the Failure Isolation Support Options screen. For this install, I will not configure IPMI Intelligent Platform Management Interface. This is the Operating System Groups selection screen. As you can see here, ASM Admin Group will be used as Oracle ASM Administrator Group. As you can see here, ASM DBA Group will be used as Oracle ASM DBA Group. As you can see here, ASM OPA Group will be used as Oracle ASM Operator Group. Because I have pre-created these operating system groups, installer have selected them by default. This is the installation location selection screen. I will use this folder as Grid Infrastructure Base. This folder will store ASM and clusterware related diagnostic logs and administrative logs. I will use this folder as Grid Infrastructure Home. This folder will store all files required for grid infrastructure software. After installation of grid infrastructure software, this folder will be owned by root user. So, Grid Infrastructure Home folder should not be under Grid Infrastructure Base folder. This is the Oracle Inventory Location Selection screen. I will use this folder for Oracle Inventory. This folder is also called as Inventory Directory. Operating system users in O install group will have permission to write to this Oracle Inventory folder. This is the Root Script Execution Permission screen. This is a new screen introduced with Oracle 12c Installer. During Oracle Grid Infrastructure software installation, we have to run some configuration scripts with root privileges. In past versions, we had to ask System Administrator to run these scripts. Now, with 12c, we have two options. If we know the root password, we can provide it here, and installer will run root scripts using root privileges. Second option is to use sudo. System administrator can configure sudo for grid user, and installer can use sudo to run root scripts using elevated privileges. If none of these options are available, then we have to use old method of asking system administrator to run these root scripts. For this installation, I know the root password, so I have selected this option. Installer is performing prerequisite checks. installer has found few issues with required prerequisites. Some of these failures are just warnings, but some are real failures. Detailed failure messages are available via this message area or by clicking on More Details link. It is not suggested to ignore failures, but there is an option to ignore all failures using this checkbox. Some of these failures can be fixed, and installer can generate scripts to fix these issues. Installer will generate scripts to fix these issues if I click on Fix and Check Again button. Installer has generated fix-up scripts. System administrator with root privileges has to execute this script on all the displayed cluster nodes. Now, I will run the fix-up script on each cluster node. Installer will perform prerequisite checks again. Now, installer has passed all prerequisite checks. This is the installer summary screen. Here, we can review all the selected options for this installation. I will save all the selected options for this installation into a response file. Clicking on this install button will start Oracle 12c Release 1 Grid Infrastructure software installation. During this installation, Grid Infrastructure software will be installed and configured on all nodes of the cluster. Now, installer is ready to run root configuration scripts and asking for confirmation to continue. I will click on Yes to continue. Now, installer will configure grid infrastructure and configure automatic storage management. As you can see here, Oracle Cluster Verification Utility has failed. Failure messages are recorded in installation log file. Because all other installation and configuration steps are successful, I will ignore this Cluster Verification Utility failure. Now, I will close the installer. This is the installation log file. Now, let us perform post-installation check on our cluster. As you can see here, ASM instance is up and running. This is the system monitor background process for ASM instance. Using error env script, I will set up Oracle environment variables. Using Oracle Cluster Ready Services CRS control utility, we can check cluster resources on all the nodes of this cluster. As you can see here, Oracle Cluster Ready Services are online on all cluster nodes. As you can see here, Oracle Cluster Synchronization Services are online on all cluster nodes. As you can see here, Oracle Event Manager is also online on all cluster nodes. This confirms that Oracle Grid Infrastructure installation and configuration was successful on this 4-node cluster. Using OLS nodes command, we can check the list of nodes in our cluster. Using server control utility, we can check status of ASM instances. As you can see here, ASM instance is running on 3 nodes in our cluster. Because this is an Oracle Flex ASM cluster, we have ASM instance running on reduced number of cluster nodes. Now, I will launch ASM Configuration Assistant ASMCA. As you can see here, ASM instance is running on 3 nodes in our Flex ASM cluster. As you can see here, data disk group was created during Grid Infrastructure installation. This disk group is of 20 GB size with external redundancy. This disk group is mounted on 3 ASM instances. Now, I will create another disk group for fast recovery area. I have provided disk group name as FRA. I have selected external redundancy for this disk group. I have selected 2 disks to be added to this disk group. Now, ASM Configuration Assistant has created Fast Recovery Area FRA disk group. As you can see here, FRA disk group is of 20 GB size with external redundancy. This disk group is mounted on 3 ASM instances. In this session, I have installed Oracle 12c Release 1 Grid Infrastructure software and configured Oracle Flex ASM on a 4-node cluster. I have also created a disk group for fast recovery area using ASM Configuration Assistant.